dusty wind swept through the military base as a truck stopped near the main gate. Soldiers turned their heads when they saw a woman step out, her uniform perfectly neat, her boots polished, and her eyes calm but distant. Her name was Sergeant Elena Ward. The sun hit her face, revealing scars that ran across her cheek and neck, old, deep marks that spoke of pain and survival. Some soldiers stared too long. Others whispered behind her back. "New transfer," one of them muttered. "Looks like she's been through hell." Another snorted. "Probably couldn't handle the real fight." Elena didn't react. She picked up her small duffel bag and walked straight toward the barracks without saying a word. Her steps were firm, steady, and controlled, like someone who had walked through fire before and learned never to flinch again. Inside the barracks, the atmosphere was loud and careless. Recruits laughed, music played on someone's phone, and the smell of instant coffee mixed with sweat and dust. When Elena entered, the noise faded for a moment. Everyone turned to look. She stood tall, saluted the officer in charge, and introduced herself simply, "Sergeant Elena Ward, reporting for duty." The officer nodded but looked uncertain. He had heard her name before in some old files but couldn't remember where. "You'll be assigned to the medic team," he said, handing her a clipboard. "We could use extra hands." As she walked toward her bunk, whispers followed her. "Those scars? Adi blast? No, maybe training accident. Looks like she wasn't careful enough." Elena ignored it all. She unpacked her few belongings, a folded uniform, a medical kit, and a small, old photograph of a team in combat gear. She placed the photo carefully in her locker before closing it. No one noticed that in the photo, she stood in the center wearing the same calm look she wore now, but without the scars. Later that day, she joined the others in the mess hall. The laughter and gossip continued. A group of soldiers nearby whispered again, thinking she couldn't hear. Why would command send someone like her here? She probably begged for light duty. Maybe she's one of those cases they pity after injury. Elena quietly ate her food, her face expressionless. But inside, she felt the familiar sting. Not of insult, but of memory. She had been through worse than words. She remembered the heat of explosions, the screams of the wounded, and the smell of burned earth. These soldiers knew nothing of real war. Later that evening, during inspection, one of the younger recruits, Private Nolan, asked her, half joking, "So, Sergeant, what happened? Lose a fight with a grenade?" The group laughed. Elena looked at him calmly. "Something like that," she said softly, then turned away. The way she said it silenced the laughter instantly. There was a weight in her tone, a truth that none of them could understand. That night, as the base quieted down, Elena sat alone outside her quarters, looking up at the stars. She ran her fingers over one of her scars, feeling the rough texture beneath her skin. Every mark had a story, a memory she never wanted to relive but could never forget. Somewhere far away, a battle had left its mark on her forever. Suddenly, a jeep pulled in. A group of soldiers returning from patrol jumped out, tired and dusty. One of them had a bleeding arm. The medic on duty was nowhere to be found. Elena stood up immediately, walked over, and without hesitation began treating the wound. Her movements were fast and precise, almost automatic. She tied the bandage perfectly, checked for infection, and gave clear instructions. The injured soldier looked at her in surprise. "You've done this before," he said. She gave a faint smile. "A few times." When she finished, she cleaned her hands, nodded to the patrol leader, and walked away. The others watched her go. One of them muttered, "She's good. Real good." In the days that followed, Elena's discipline and skill didn't go unnoticed. She completed every task early, helped others when no one asked, and never complained. Still, the whispers continued. People were curious but cautious. She spoke little, worked hard, and kept to herself. Some found her mysterious. Others found her intimidating. What no one knew was that her transfer wasn't ordinary. The papers that brought her to the base were signed directly by top command, with a note, "Special reassignment, classified reason." Even the commanding officer didn't have clearance to read the full report. At night, Elena would sometimes wake up suddenly, her heart racing, sweat covering her face. Flashbacks of a burning convoy, shouts of her name over a radio, and the sound of gunfire echoed in her mind. But she would calm herself, breathe deeply, and remind herself where she was. This was a new place, a second chance. She didn't want anyone here to know what had happened before. The base continued its routine, morning drills, long patrols, and endless chatter. Elena blended in as best she could, keeping her focus on her duty. But even in silence, she could feel eyes on her back wherever she went. The soldiers around her saw her scars as a sign of weakness. None of them guessed that they were the marks of someone who had seen more war, more loss, and more bravery than all of them combined. To them, she was just another medic with a strange past. To her, this was a test of patience, of endurance, of how long she could hide the truth. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting an orange glow over the base, Elena zipped up her jacket and looked toward the training field. She whispered to herself, "Let them laugh. One day they'll understand." And deep down, she knew that day would come sooner than anyone expected. The next few days at the base were not easy for Elena. Everywhere she went, she could feel people's eyes following her. Some were curious, others judgmental. Her scars were the first thing everyone noticed, and soon they became the favorite topic of gossip among the soldiers. They didn't see her skill or discipline. All they saw were the marks on her face and neck. In the mess hall, she often heard small groups whispering when she passed by. "I heard she was caught in an explosion," one said. "No, someone told me she panicked during combat and got others hurt," another replied. Someone laughed softly. "Maybe she ran away from battle. That's why she got sent here." Elena never responded. She sat quietly in a corner, eating her food, her eyes focused on the plate. It was easier to stay silent than to argue. People believed what they wanted to believe. She had learned long ago that proving herself with words meant nothing. Only actions could silence doubts. In the barracks, the gossip continued. When she removed her jacket, the scars on her arm caught attention again. A few soldiers laughed quietly, trying to guess the story behind them. "Probably a training accident," one said mockingly. "She doesn't look like someone who's seen real combat." Elena folded her uniform neatly and ignored them. Inside, she felt a dull ache. Not anger, but disappointment. They didn't know how many lives she had once saved. How many nights she had stayed awake, patching up dying soldiers while bullets whistled overhead. They didn't know that every scar she carried was earned by saving someone else. But that was fine. She didn't need their approval. Her only companion was her old medic bag, worn out, but always clean. When she opened it, the soldiers sometimes noticed a faded patch sewn inside. It had the insignia of an elite rescue team, one that was disbanded years ago. Nobody asked her about it. Maybe they were afraid of the answer. During morning drills, Elena always arrived first. While others yawned and complained about the cold, she was already ready. Standing straight, boots polished, eyes sharp. She completed every task without hesitation, from weapon checks to first aid rounds. But even then, her dedication only made the others whisper more. "She's trying too hard," one of them joked. "Maybe she wants to impress command." One afternoon, while cleaning medical supplies, Elena overheard two young recruits talking nearby. "Did you see her face up close? Scary. How does she even look at herself in the mirror?" Elena's hands froze for a second, but she kept working. She had faced gunfire before. A few careless words wouldn't break her. Still, when she was alone later that night, she touched her reflection in the small mirror by her bunk. The scars stared back at her, cold and real. She took a deep breath and whispered, "These are not my shame. They're my story." Her commanding officer, Captain Reeves, started to notice her silence and her efficiency. He called her into his office one evening. "Ward, you're one of the most disciplined soldiers I've seen," he said. "But you keep to yourself too much. The team doesn't know you." "With respect, sir," Elena replied, standing straight. "I'm here to do my duty, not to be known." The captain studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Just remember, this base values teamwork. Outside, the other soldiers were laughing around the fire pit. Elena walked past them quietly. One of them called out, "Hey, Sergeant, why don't you join us? Or are you too good for regular soldiers?" His tone was mocking. She turned, gave a small polite smile and said, "Not at all, but I prefer quiet company." Then she walked away before anyone could respond. Her calmness confused them. They expected anger, maybe shame, but she gave them neither. The next morning, something unexpected happened. During a first aid drill, one of the recruits accidentally cut his hand deeply while cleaning a weapon. Blood poured from the wound, and panic broke out. Before anyone else could react, Elena was already beside him. She tore a strip from her sleeve, pressed it against the wound, and stopped the bleeding with professional precision. "Keep pressure here," she instructed firmly. Her voice was calm, confident. She cleaned the cut, applied antiseptic, and wrapped it perfectly. The young soldier looked at her with wide eyes. "You did that so fast," he said. Elena simply replied, "I've done it before." After that, a few soldiers started to see her differently, but others still laughed. "It was just a small cut," they said. "Anyone could have done that." Later that evening, while Elena was checking the supplies in the medical tent, Private Nolan approached her again, the same soldier who had mocked her before. He leaned on the doorway and asked, "You always so quiet, Sergeant? You don't talk about your past much." Elena didn't look up. "There's nothing to talk about," she said calmly. Nolan smirked. "Everyone's got a story. Yours must be interesting, with those scars and all." For a moment, she met his eyes. There was no anger, just a deep, tired look. "You wouldn't want to hear it?" she said softly. "Because it's not a story, it's a reminder." Nolan didn't understand what she meant, but something in her voice made him uneasy. He walked away, pretending to laugh, but the sound came out awkward and hollow. That night, as the wind howled through the camp, Elena sat outside again, cleaning her medical instruments under the dim light. Somewhere behind her, soldiers were still talking, still laughing, but their words no longer mattered. She had seen too much to be affected by gossip. In her heart, she knew that one day the truth would come out. The truth about where those scars came from, the lives behind them, and the kind of soldier she truly was. Until then, she would keep doing her duty silently, waiting for the moment when actions would speak louder than rumors. And as the cold night deepened, Elena whispered to herself, "Let them talk. They don't know yet who I really am." The morning sun rose over the camp, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. It was the beginning of another tough day of field training. Every soldier in the base lined up at the field, their uniforms dusty, their eyes sleepy. The instructor shouted orders, his voice echoing across the training ground. But while others moved lazily, Elena was already there. Standing tall, her uniform neat, her eyes sharp and focused. Training days were known to be hard at this base. The soldiers had to run long distances carrying heavy gear, crawl under barbed wire, climb muddy hills, and treat fake, wounded under time pressure. Tested both strength and teamwork. Most soldiers hated it, but Elena didn't complain once. She just nodded and followed every command with quiet discipline. As soon as the whistle blew, everyone started running. Dust rose from the ground. The sound of boots pounding filled the air. Elena ran silently, her steps steady, her breathing calm. Some recruits ran fast in the beginning but soon started slowing down, gasping for air. Elena, on the other hand, kept a constant pace, neither too fast nor too slow. Her face remained expressionless, but sweat ran down her temples. Private Nolan, running beside her, sneered. "Didn't think you'd last this long, Sergeant," he said between breaths. Elena didn't reply. She just kept running. A few minutes later, Nolan stumbled and nearly fell. Without a word, Elena grabbed his arm, pulled him up, and kept moving. When they finally reached the finish line, the instructor barked, "Drop and give me 50 push-ups." The soldiers groaned, their bodies already exhausted. Elena dropped to the ground without hesitation. Her arms moved rhythmically, strong and controlled. By the time others struggled to complete 20, she was already done. "Ward!" the instructor shouted. "Where'd you learn that kind of stamina?" She stood up straight. "Years of practice, sir." Her tone was calm, but something in her voice made the instructor pause. There was experience behind it, real, hard-earned experience. Next came the crawling exercise. The soldiers had to move under barbed wire while fake gunfire played from speakers. The ground was wet and muddy. Some soldiers panicked at the noise, covering their heads instead of crawling forward. Elena moved quickly, keeping her body low, her eyes focused ahead. The mud smeared across her face, but she didn't stop. Her movements were too smooth, too precise, like she had done it in real battle, not just training. At the other end, she saw one of the recruits frozen in fear, unable to move because the fake gunfire sounded too real. Elena crawled back toward him, grabbed his sleeve, and shouted over the noise, "Move! You're safe. Keep your head down and crawl." Her voice snapped him out of it, and he followed her lead until they both reached the end safely. When the instructor called for a break, the soldiers gathered around the water barrels, panting heavily. Elena quietly helped refill the bottles and handed them out to those who were too tired to stand. Some soldiers began to look at her differently now. They still whispered, but the tone was no longer mocking. It was uncertain, almost curious. After a short rest, the second part of training began: emergency field response. Soldiers were told to treat a fake, wounded soldier using limited supplies while under pressure. For most, it was just a drill. But for Elena, it was second nature. As soon as the instructor shouted, "Go!" she rushed to her patient, assessed the wound, and began treatment with calm precision. She used her scarf to stop the bleeding, tore a strip from her sleeve for a bandage, and stabilized the arm using nearby sticks. The instructor watched silently. Her movements were fast, confident, and efficient, too good for a simple medic. "Time!" the instructor yelled after 5 minutes. When he checked Elena's work, he nodded slowly. "Perfect technique," he said quietly. "Better than most field medics I've seen." The other soldiers looked at her with surprise. Private Nolan muttered under his breath, "She's not just good. She's trained like a pro." Another soldier replied, "Yeah, but where did she learn that?" Elena simply stood in silence, her expression unreadable. Inside, she felt the familiar rush of memory. Gunfire, blood, desperate cries for help. She had done all this before, not with dummies but with real people whose lives depended on her every move. As the day went on, the exercises became harder. The soldiers had to climb a steep dirt hill carrying full gear. Some fell back, cursing and gasping. Elena moved at a steady rhythm, her muscles straining but her focus unshaken. When one soldier twisted his ankle and cried out, others hesitated. Elena immediately dropped her pack, supported him by the shoulder, and helped him climb the rest of the way. By the time they reached the top, she was covered in mud and sweat, but her posture was still straight. The instructor blew the whistle and shouted, "That's what teamwork looks like." Then, looking at Elena, he added quietly, "Good work, Sergeant." For the first time, some soldiers clapped. It wasn't loud, but it was genuine. The same people who had laughed at her before now looked at her with respect, or at least curiosity. Later that evening, back at the barracks, Private Nolan approached her again. This time, his voice wasn't mocking. "You were impressive today," he admitted awkwardly. Elena smiled faintly. "We all did what we had to." "But you didn't even flinch," Nolan said. "You acted like you'd been through real combat." Elena looked away for a moment before replying, "Some lessons stay with you forever." Then she walked past him, leaving him silent. That night, while others slept soundly after the exhausting day, Elena stayed awake for a while, cleaning her boots and uniform. Her body ached, but her mind was calm. She felt a small sense of satisfaction, not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had reminded herself that she still had it in her, the strength, the courage, the discipline that once defined her. She looked out of the window at the dark sky and whispered softly, "You can change your name, your unit, your story, but not who you really are. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that this training day was only the beginning. The time would come soon when she'd have to prove herself not just in drills, but in real battle once again. It was late at night at the base. The sky was dark, and a cold wind blew across the camp. Most of the soldiers were asleep, their gear neatly stacked beside their bunks. Only the night guards were awake, walking slowly along the fences with their rifles. Elena was in her small barack room, cleaning her medical tools as she did every night. The room was quiet, the light dim. She liked this time of night, when the world seemed still and her thoughts could rest for a while. Suddenly, a loud explosion shattered the silence. The ground shook violently. The light flickered and went out. For a second, Elena froze, her heart pounding. Then her instincts took over. She grabbed her medic bag, slung it over her shoulder, and rushed outside. The air was filled with smoke, dust, and chaos. Alarms screamed. Red emergency lights flashed across the base. Soldiers ran in every direction, shouting orders. Another explosion hit near the west gate, lighting up the sky with fire. Elena could hear gunfire now, real sharp, deadly. The base was under attack. "Get to your positions," someone yelled. "We're under assault." Elena ran toward the wounded. Her boots splashed through mud and blood as she reached the training field. A young soldier lay on the ground, his leg badly injured from the blast. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him. "Stay with me," she said firmly, her voice calm despite the chaos. She tore open his pant leg, applied a tourniquet, and stopped the bleeding in seconds. "Medic!" Another soldier screamed from behind. Elena turned and saw two more men dragging a third, unconscious with a head wound. Bullets whizzed overhead, but she didn't flinch. She rushed over, dropped to her knees, and started checking his pulse. Her hands moved fast, steady like a machine. Around her, the base was in full panic. Some soldiers hid behind barriers, firing blindly into the dark. Others were too afraid to move. But Elena stayed low and kept working. Her mind was clear, focused only on saving lives. "Cover the medic!" someone shouted. A few soldiers began firing to protect her as she worked. She shouted back instructions without even looking up. "You, keep pressure here. You, hold that light steady." Her tone was strong and commanding. In that moment, she wasn't just a medic. She was a leader. Then, a massive blast hit the communication tower. The shockwave knocked everyone down. Elena fell hard but quickly got up. Her ears rang, but she didn't stop. She could see the base commander shouting orders near the bunker, trying to organize defense, but confusion was everywhere. Elena saw that the western wall had been breached. Enemy fighters were pushing in. The situation was getting worse by the minute. She sprinted toward the defensive line, pulling out smoke grenades from a fallen soldier's vest. With sharp accuracy, she threw them into the open field, creating a thick cloud that hid the defenders from the attackers. "Move the wounded to the bunker now," she yelled to the nearest squad. They obeyed instantly, following her voice like it was an order from command. She helped lift a bleeding soldier onto a stretcher, ignoring her own injuries, tiny cuts and burns from shrapnel. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she pushed through. "You'll be fine," she said to the soldier, even though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. When they finally reached the bunker, Elena quickly organized the space. "I need light here. Line up the wounded against that wall. Get me clean bandages, saline. Anything you can find." A young soldier stood frozen in fear at the doorway. "What do we do, Sergeant?" he asked, shaking. Elena looked at him firmly. "You fight smart. You don't panic. And you don't leave anyone behind. Now go." The soldier nodded and ran out, his fear replaced with determination. Minutes felt like hours. Elena moved from one patient to another, cleaning wounds, stopping bleeding, injecting painkillers, shouting quick instructions. The smell of smoke and blood mixed in the air. The sound of gunfire outside grew louder, then faded, then returned again. In the middle of it all, Elena's calmness stood out. Even the senior officers noticed it. One of them whispered, "She's not ordinary. She's been through this before." Finally, after what felt like forever, the sound of gunfire started to fade. Reinforcements arrived from nearby patrol units, pushing the attackers back. The base was saved, but at a heavy cost. Many were injured, some dead. When the shooting stopped, everyone looked exhausted and broken. The soldiers began to gather around the bunker, helping each other. Elena was still kneeling beside a wounded soldier, wrapping his arm in a clean bandage. Her face was covered in ash and sweat, her uniform torn, but her eyes were sharp and steady. The base commander approached her, looking amazed. "You saved more lives tonight than anyone else here," he said quietly. Elena just shook her head. "I did my job, sir." He frowned slightly. "No, you did more than that. You took command when everyone else panicked." But Elena didn't respond. She looked around at the men and women she had treated, some alive, some not, and simply said, "War doesn't care who panics. You either act or you die." Later that night, as the fires died down and the soldiers rested, Elena sat alone near the bunker entrance. Her hands were still shaking slightly from adrenaline. She looked up at the stars through the smoke-filled sky. For the first time since her arrival, no one was whispering or mocking her. Instead, soldiers who passed by nodded respectfully. Some even saluted. One of them, Private Nolan, approached her quietly. His voice was softer now. You saved us," he said. "If it weren't for you, half the base would be gone." Elena looked at him for a long moment and then replied, "No one survives alone." As the night turned to dawn, she stayed awake, watching the horizon slowly turn from dark blue to pale gold. She knew this battle would change everything. People had finally seen what she could do. But what they still didn't know was why she was so calm under fire, what kind of past had trained her to move through chaos without fear. And soon, that truth would begin to surface. Morning came slowly after the long night of chaos. Smoke still rose from parts of the base, the air heavy with the smell of burnt metal and gunpowder. Soldiers moved quietly, cleaning up the wreckage, carrying the wounded to medical tents, and collecting the bodies of those who didn't survive. The attack had left deep marks, not just on the buildings, but on everyone's hearts. Elena hadn't slept all night. Her uniform was torn, her hands covered with dried blood that wasn't hers. She had been treating the injured nonstop since the first explosion. Now, as the sun began to rise, she sat near the medical tent, exhausted but calm. Her face was smudged with ash, her eyes red from fatigue, yet there was a quiet strength in her posture. Around her, soldiers whispered. The same people who once mocked her were now speaking of her with awe. "That medic. She saved my whole team. She walked right through gunfire. I saw her drag a man twice her size out of the burning vehicle." Even the officers looked at her differently now. They no longer saw her as the quiet, scarred woman who kept to herself. They saw her as someone who had faced death without fear. But Elena didn't care about their stares or praise. She was just glad most of them were alive. By noon, news of the attack had reached higher command. A convoy of armored jeeps arrived at the base, kicking up dust as they stopped near the main tent. Out stepped General Marcus Harris, a tall, stern man known for his strict discipline and sharp memory. He was respected and feared by everyone in the military. The soldiers immediately stood in line and saluted. The general walked through the camp, inspecting the damage. His face remained hard, but his eyes were sharp, scanning everything carefully. When he reached the medical area, he noticed the organized rows of wounded soldiers being treated efficiently. He asked an officer, "Who coordinated the medical response?" "Sergeant Elena Ward, sir," the officer replied. "She took charge during the attack. Saved dozens of men." The general paused. "Elena Ward?" He repeated the name slowly, as if it meant something to him. A strange expression crossed his face, surprise mixed with disbelief. He looked around and spotted her kneeling beside a patient, wrapping a bandage around a burned arm. Her hands moved steadily, her voice calm as she reassured the soldier. "You'll be fine. Just keep breathing." The general watched her quietly for a few moments. There was something about her posture, the way she handled chaos like it was normal. It triggered a memory buried deep in his mind. He had seen someone like that before, years ago in a classified mission no one talked about anymore. When Elena noticed the general standing nearby, she immediately stood up and saluted. "Sir." Her voice was steady but respectful. He nodded slowly, his eyes studying her scars. "Sergeant Ward," he said, "you handled yourself well last night. I've read the preliminary reports. Your actions saved this base." "Just doing my duty, sir," she replied. The general's gaze hardened slightly. "Duty is one thing. What you did went far beyond that. You gave orders under fire, treated the wounded under attack, and coordinated evacuation while injured yourself." Elena said nothing. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to praise. She had always done what needed to be done, whether people noticed or not. After a pause, the general asked quietly, "Where did you learn that kind of field control?" Her eyes flickered for a moment. "Experience, sir." He didn't push further, but his curiosity grew. He turned to the officer beside him. "Bring me her file." That evening, while the base settled down and soldiers finally got some rest, the general sat inside his command tent, reading through Elena's personnel file. The more he read, the more confused he became. Her records showed that she had transferred from a small, inactive post. There was nothing about her earlier career, no mention of previous missions, no commendations, nothing. Almost as if someone had erased her past. He frowned and called his aide. "Get me the full clearance report on this soldier. I want access to any restricted files under her name." Within an hour, a classified folder was brought in, a file marked "Top Secret, Operation Iron Veil." The general froze. He remembered that name. It was one of the most dangerous rescue operations in military history. He had commanded the mission himself years ago. Many brave soldiers had died that night, and one medic had gone missing in action, presumed dead. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the file. Inside were old photographs, black and white, grainy from battlefield cameras. And there, in one of the pictures, stood a young woman with the same sharp eyes, same determined expression, but without the scars. Her name tag read, Lieutenant Elena Ward. The general leaned back, shocked. "It can't be," he whispered. He read the mission summary. Lieutenant Elena Ward, combat medic, led rescue operations under heavy enemy fire, stayed behind to treat the wounded when evacuation failed, saved 20 lives before an explosion destroyed the outpost, declared Kia body unrecovered. He stared at the last line for a long time. She was supposed to be dead. Now, years later, she stood alive in his camp, wearing a new rank, carrying new scars, and pretending to be someone else. The general closed the file slowly. Everything began to make sense. The way she moved during battle, her calm under pressure, her silence about the past. She wasn't just another medic. She was the legend of Operation Iron Veil, the medic who never left the field, the one who was believed to have sacrificed herself to save others. That night, as soldiers slept peacefully after the long battle, the general sat in silence, staring at her photo. A strange respect filled his heart. "You were dead to the world," he murmured. "And yet here you are, still saving lives." He decided then that he needed to speak to her privately. The world might have forgotten who Elena Ward truly was, but he hadn't. And now that he knew the truth, everything was about to change for her once again. The next morning, the camp woke up to a new routine. Soldiers were rebuilding walls, refilling supplies, and trying to bring back a sense of normal life. The worst of the battle was over, but the memories still haunted many of them. Some of the younger soldiers flinched at every sound, while others avoided talking about what happened. Yet one person stayed calm and steady, Elena. She moved through the camp with quiet confidence, helping, organizing, and encouraging those around her. But that morning, something unusual happened. An officer approached her and said, "Sergeant Ward, the general wants to see you in his office." Elena froze for a moment. She hadn't expected this. The general rarely called for soldiers personally, especially not medics. She quickly cleaned her uniform, adjusted her sleeves to hide her scars as best as she could, and walked toward the command tent. When she entered, General Harris was standing by a large table, covered in maps and reports. His eyes were serious but calm. "At ease, Sergeant," he said, motioning for her to sit. She sat down, unsure of what this meeting was really about. The general studied her for a long moment before sliding a folder across the table. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Elena's heart skipped a beat when she saw the label. Operation Iron Veil. Her face went pale. For years, she had buried that part of her life, thinking it was gone forever. She looked up slowly. "Sir, I don't think," he interrupted gently. "I know who you are, Lieutenant." Her breath caught. No one had called her that rank in years. The general continued, "You were reported missing in action during the Iron Veil mission. The record said you were presumed dead after the explosion." He opened the folder, revealing an old, burnt photo of her younger self. "But you didn't die, did you?" Elena looked down. Her voice was quiet but steady. "No, sir. I survived. Barely." He leaned forward. "Then why didn't you come back? Why did you hide your identity all these years?" Elena took a deep breath. "Because there was nothing left to come back to. After the explosion, my team was gone. I was trapped under debris for days. When rescue came, I was unrecognizable. Burned, scarred, broken. They didn't believe I was the same person. I didn't correct them. I thought, maybe it was better that way." The general stayed silent, listening carefully. Her words carried deep pain, but also strength. "I wanted to disappear," she continued. "I wanted to start over. So, I took a new identity, became a medic again, and went where I was needed. My face changed, my name changed, but my duty didn't." General Harris looked at her scars, the ones she had always tried to hide. Now, he understood that each one told a story of survival, of sacrifice, of courage that few could imagine. After a long pause, he said quietly, "You could have taken an easy post, far away from the battlefield. Why come back here, to a place like this?" Elena smiled faintly. "Because I still believe in saving people, sir. No matter who they are, no matter where it happens. I wasn't born to give up. The battlefield may have taken everything from me, but it couldn't take my purpose." The general nodded slowly, deeply moved. "You're a remarkable soldier, Lieutenant Ward." "I'm just a medic, sir," she replied softly. He smiled slightly. "No, you're more than that. You're living proof of what true courage looks like." For the first time in years, Elena felt a sense of peace. She had lived in the shadows for so long, haunted by her past, running from it. But now it had finally caught up with her, and instead of punishment, she found understanding. After a moment, the general stood up and said, "There's something I want to show you." He led her outside, past the tents, to the far end of the camp where a small memorial stood. It was made of simple stones, each engraved with the names of fallen soldiers. He pointed to one of the names, Lieutenant Elena Ward. Elena stared at it, speechless. Her old name was carved among the dead. For years, that stone had stood as a symbol of her sacrifice. Now she stood before it alive. "Every year," the general said quietly, "we honor the heroes of Iron Veil. None of us knew that one of them was still out there, saving lives again." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, though she tried to hold them back. "They were my family, sir," she whispered. "I couldn't save them all." The general placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved more than most ever could. You don't need to carry that guilt anymore." They stood in silence for a while, the wind rustling the flags above them. When they returned to the main camp, the general turned to her. "I won't force you to reveal your identity if you don't want to. But the army deserves to know the truth someday. You've inspired this entire base without anyone even knowing who you really are." Elena nodded slowly. "Maybe one day, sir. For now, I'll keep doing what I do best." He smiled. "Then keep leading by example. The soldiers already see you as their hero, even if they don't know why." As she walked away, Elena felt lighter than she had in years. The burden of her secret didn't feel as heavy anymore. She looked at the soldiers working around her, many of whom she had saved, and for the first time, she let herself smile. They still whispered about her scars, but now it wasn't out of mockery. It was out of respect, even admiration. They had seen what she could do, what she had survived, and what she stood for. That night, as the sun set over the camp, Elena sat quietly near the medical tent, watching the orange light fade behind the hills. For the first time, she wasn't haunted by the ghosts of her past. She was ready to live again, not as the soldier who died long ago, but as the medic who refused to give up. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that her story wasn't over yet. Days passed after Elena's meeting with General Harris, but things at the base didn't go back to normal. Something had changed not just for Elena, but for everyone around her. Soldiers now looked at her with a new kind of respect. The same people who once laughed at her scars now greeted her with salutes and gratitude. They whispered stories about her bravery, how she had saved them when the bullets were flying, and how she never seemed to panic no matter how bad things got. But Elena didn't care about attention. She stayed humble, focused on her duty. She treated the wounded, trained the new medics, and kept the camp running smoothly. Still, a part of her couldn't forget the moment when the general revealed that he knew her secret. It was as if a part of her past had finally been pulled out from the shadows. One evening, the general called for her again. When she entered his tent, she noticed a map spread out across his table. Red lines and circles showed a new mission, a dangerous one. He looked up and said, "We've received intel about an enemy outpost across the border. It's heavily guarded, but they're holding prisoners, our soldiers. We're sending a rescue team." Elena nodded. "How many men?" "2 squads," the general replied. Then he looked directly at her. "And I want you to go with them." She blinked, surprised. "Sir, I'm a medic. My job is to save lives, not fight on the front lines." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I need you there. These men won't just need firepower. They'll need someone who can keep them alive when things go wrong. And I trust no one more than you." Elena hesitated for a moment. The idea of going back into a full combat zone brought back memories she had buried deep inside. Flames, explosions, the screams of her team during Operation Iron Veil. It all flashed through her mind. But then she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Dawn," he said. "Get your team ready." That night, Elena packed her gear quietly. She checked her medical kit twice, making sure everything was in place: morphine, gauze, blood packs, bandages, emergency shots. Her hands moved automatically, trained from years of experience. She was nervous, but there was also a sense of purpose burning in her chest. This time, she wouldn't lose anyone. Before sunrise, the rescue team gathered near the transport trucks. The soldiers looked focused but anxious. When they saw Elena approaching, they straightened up. One of them, a young private named Lewis, said, "Ma'am, it's an honor to have you with us." She gave him a small smile. "Just stay sharp, Private. We'll bring everyone home." The convoy moved out under the dim light of dawn. The journey was rough, through broken roads, dense forests, and ruined villages. When they finally reached the outskirts of the enemy territory, the team stopped to plan. The outpost was hidden in a valley surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers. Drones buzzed overhead, and guards patrolled the perimeter. The mission was simple but dangerous. Get in, free the prisoners, and get out before sunrise. But in war, nothing ever goes as planned. The attack began silently. The first squad cut through the wire fence, while the second covered them from behind. Elena stayed in the middle, carrying her medical pack, ready for anything. Within minutes, gunfire erupted. Bullets flew through the dark, explosions shook the ground, and soldiers shouted orders over the radio. Elena ran from cover to cover, dragging the wounded to safety, patching them up while chaos raged around her. Her hands worked fast, her mind calm. She remembered every move from her old training: how to stop bleeding, how to treat burns, how to save someone with seconds left to live. At one point, a soldier was hit near the chest. "I'm hit!" he screamed. Without thinking, Elena sprinted through open fire, slid next to him, and pressed her hands on the wound. "Stay with me," she shouted. "You're not dying today." Bullets whizzed past her head, but she didn't stop. She tied a field dressing around his chest, gave him a pain shot, and yelled for cover fire. Then she dragged him behind a wall with sheer determination. The soldiers around her couldn't believe what they saw. She wasn't just a medic. She was unstoppable. As the team pushed deeper into the outpost, Elena found the prisoner cages. Inside were soldiers, weak, bruised, but alive. "We're here to take you home," she said firmly. She broke the locks with a metal rod and helped them out one by one. But just as they were preparing to escape, the enemy reinforcements arrived. Gunfire lit up the night again. The team was surrounded. "Fall back!" shouted the squad leader. "We're pinned." Elena looked at the prisoners, some too weak to run. "We can't leave them," she yelled. The general's voice came through the radio, calm but commanding. "Ward, you need to get out now." "That's an order." Elena hesitated. "With all due respect, sir, not until everyone's out." Then, something shifted inside her. That same fire she felt years ago during Operation Iron Veil came alive again. She took charge. "You cover the east side. You carry the wounded. Move." Even in the middle of chaos, her voice brought order. The soldiers obeyed without question. Under her command, they formed a defensive line, fought their way out, and finally reached the extraction point. When the last soldier climbed into the truck, Elena was still there, helping lift a wounded man. As the vehicle roared away, she looked back at the burning outpost. The mission had succeeded, every prisoner had been rescued. Back at the base, the soldiers cheered. They had seen her courage with their own eyes. The general approached her, his expression proud but emotional. "You did it again, Lieutenant," he said quietly. Elena looked at him and smiled softly. "Just doing my duty, sir." He nodded. "No. You reminded everyone what true bravery looks like." That night, the entire camp gathered around the fire, not just to celebrate the mission, but to honor the woman who had led them through it. For the first time, Elena didn't hide her scars. She stood tall, proud, as the soldiers cheered her name. The girl they once mocked was now their hero. And deep inside, Elena finally felt that her purpose, her redemption, had been found. The morning after the rescue mission was calm. The air smelled of dust and victory. The soldiers were tired but proud. Every single one of them had made it back alive. For the first time in months, laughter echoed through the camp. They were alive because of one person, Elena Ward. She sat quietly outside the medical tent, patching up her own arm where a bullet had grazed her. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, but her face remained calm. She didn't need medals or applause. Saving her team was enough for her. Still, everywhere she went, soldiers stopped to salute her. They called her the Ghost Medic, a name born out of respect and awe. But that morning, something unexpected happened. General Harris called for a full assembly at the center of the camp. Soldiers gathered quickly, forming perfect lines. No one knew exactly what was happening, but the tension in the air was electric. When Elena arrived, she saw the general standing on a small platform. Behind him, several officers held a covered frame, something large and heavy. The moment she approached, all eyes turned toward her. "Sergeant Ward," the general said, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "Step forward." Elena obeyed, though she felt uncomfortable with all the attention. She stopped in front of him and saluted. The general nodded and looked at the soldiers. "Men and women of this base," he began. "You all know this medic, the one who saved countless lives during the recent attack, and again during last night's rescue mission. What most of you don't know is who she really is." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Elena's heartbeat quickened. The general continued, "Years ago, during Operation Iron Veil, a combat medic led a rescue mission that saved 20 soldiers. She was declared missing in action, presumed dead. Her name was Lieutenant Elena Ward." The soldiers gasped. Many of them had heard the legend of Operation Iron Veil, the medic who never left the battlefield, who sacrificed herself for her team. General Harris turned to Elena and said, "That medic wasn't lost. She's been among us all along." still serving, still saving lives. He pulled the cover from the frame behind him. It was a memorial plaque, and at the top, engraved in gold letters, was her name. Lieutenant Elena Ward, the legend who never gave up. Elena stood frozen. Her old name, her old life. The soldiers looked at her in stunned silence, and then one by one, they began to clap. The sound grew louder and louder until it echoed across the camp. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, though she tried to hide them. She had never imagined this moment. For years, she had lived in the shadows, carrying guilt and pain, believing her story had ended on that battlefield. But now, standing there, surrounded by the very people she had saved, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The general stepped closer and said softly, "You hid because you thought the world didn't need you anymore, but you were wrong. You've done more good than anyone could ask for. The army needs people like you. People who never give up, no matter how deep the scars run." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Sir, I don't know if I deserve all this. I just did what anyone should." He shook his head gently. "No, Lieutenant. You did what heroes do." The soldiers cheered again, chanting her name. "Elena! Elena!" The sound filled the entire base. Even those who once mocked her now looked at her with pride in their eyes. That evening, as the sun set, the camp held a small ceremony. A new flag was raised, and the memorial stone that once listed her as missing was replaced with a new one. Returned, still serving. After the ceremony, Elena sat quietly by the fire, watching the stars appear in the sky. The general approached and sat beside her. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" he said. She smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd see my own name come back to life." He chuckled. "You've earned it. You've given hope to every soldier here." There was a long pause before Elena said quietly, "I used to think my scars were my shame, reminders of what I lost. But now, I see they're reminders of what I survived." The general nodded. "They're proof that you're stronger than the world that tried to break you." For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the distant laughter of soldiers around the campfire. The stars shone bright above them, and the wind carried the faint sound of music. Someone had started playing a harmonica near the tents. Elena looked around, seeing faces full of life and hope, faces she had helped keep alive. A soft smile touched her lips. This is enough for me," she whispered. But the general looked at her with a knowing smile. "Something tells me your story isn't finished yet. Heroes like you never stop writing history." The next morning, as dawn broke, Elena stood near the edge of the camp, watching the golden light spread across the horizon. A convoy was preparing to move out for another mission, and she was already on the list to go. The general had offered her a chance to retire, to finally rest, but she had politely declined. She strapped her medical bag over her shoulder and said to one of the young soldiers beside her, "Ready to save the world again?" The soldier laughed nervously. "Only if you're leading, ma'am." She smiled. "Then we'll be fine." As the trucks rolled out, dust rising behind them, Elena turned her gaze toward the open road. Her scars still marked her skin, but they no longer felt heavy. They were part of her story, a story that had come full circle. From a broken soldier who once hid from her past, she had become a living legend, proof that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the courage to rise again after it. And somewhere deep in her heart, she whispered to herself, "They laughed at my scars once, but now, they tell my story." The wind blew softly through the camp as she disappeared into the rising sun. Not as a ghost of the past, but as a healer, a warrior, and a symbol of what true courage looks like.